Congratulations. We're pleased to announce that you've been selected by Google to be part of their yearly estimate of the amount of losers using their platform. We're glad you made the cut, and we'd like to sincerely thank you for your contribution.
I'm just joshing people. Not really though. In all seriousness, this is about taxes, the world's most mundane topic, specifically about the leftist tax position. Y'all are probably thinking that this is like the Pixie Fairy equivalent of YouTube videos, but I think this topic is important, and crucial even, depending on what angle you look at it. Now, believe me, I am not a simp for the concept of taxes. If you would have asked me a year ago that I'd be spending any time on this whatsoever, I'd probably grab you by the collar and I'd tell you that you're crazy. Regardless, my attitude on the concept has managed to grow in leaps and bounds over time. Part of the reason has to do with my first video, which set much of the stage for this one. But I'd say most of the reason lies in the fact that taxes inherently are one of the great movers of the world. The education and debate around them, especially from the conservative aisle, continues to do them unbelievably dirty. If people feign interest or hate them like there's no tomorrow, flaws will remain, and the concept will be fleshed out inefficiently. The silver lining is at least people care about their effects. And by care, I mean they really care. They go cuckoo bananas for them. Sometimes in a good way, most times in a bad way. They grill officials for the specifics, they throw money at accountants to avoid them, they literally revolt and start wars depending on how they're administered. Taxes are kind of a big deal, and ideologies sell changes to them. Pretty much each ideology tries to optimize their specific position on taxes by tweaking the fundamental position just enough to curry favor with voters, without sacrificing the underlying principles that differentiates it. I want to place a large emphasis on this. Political success is greatly dependent on how a political entity sells their take on taxes. Progressives inherently struggle with this, because we too are trying to sell a tax system that realizes our own position, specifically on a term known as distributive justice. We argue in the positive for robust distribution, which requires a rather developed and complete position. Therefore, there's a higher bar that needs to be cleared for leftists, which involves drafting, passing, altering, and maintaining our position. Imagine you want a god-tier fade. Not only does the barber gotta plan out how they're gonna make you look less ugly, but you gotta maintain it, and you gotta talk it up to your friends before the big reveal. Designing worthwhile policy takes work, but there really is a value to producing sophisticated plans for voters. So, without further ado, let's get into that position. Here's a definition of taxes straight from the primary source. I apologize in advance for the pain felt listening to this. It's quite an agonizing definition, but stick with me here.
Taxes are used by states to fund the provision of public goods and services, to engage in indirect or direct forms of redistribution, and to mold the behavior of individual citizens through incentivizing certain activities through tax breaks, or to dissuade people from engaging in other activities by means of Pigouvian taxes, including sin taxes.
So, in the broadest terms, based on this definition, we can say that a responsible progressive tax system would be one that can nearly or completely fund the government, i.e. the culmination of public goods, while placing an emphasis on the mechanism of just and intelligent redistribution. That's all in all, but it doesn't explain nor necessitate the reason for our position. The reasoning needs a logical foundation, which we have to lay down ourselves, one that justifies the implementation of these values. Typically, policymakers skip over this step, but leftism doesn't have that luxury, unfortunately. We keep assuming that everyone is going to get on board without explaining why these changes are necessary. Most voters are skeptical, especially towards those that depart from the status quo. There's also a dogpiling mentality against leftism, which places an additional layer of difficulty on top of things. If the opposition were to peel back the layers of our tax position, like an onion, and find no core or germ at the center, whoever has peddled the onion is going to be grilled on why the hell the center of the onion is missing. But if we incorporate this foundational germ into the onion, like it should be, voters will find themselves nodding to an actually well-developed position, one that is critical to the solutions that leftism values, and fundamental to many other positions. And this foundation starts with distributive justice. Distributive justice is a concept that involves the fair allocation of resources. Taxes, benefits, charity, wages, and legal verdicts move resources from one person or entity to the other in the hopes of a just outcome. Pretty much any reasonable academic and layman acknowledge that there are inequalities in this world, and that some form of distributive justice should be utilized to rectify them. The argument, however, isn't focused on the legitimacy of distributive justice itself, but its extent. And the extent of distributive justice is contingent on the extent of inequality. So our tax position should be reliant upon how much inequality there is. And we can use the level of inequality to gauge how much distribution is needed to rectify it. Because ideologies have opposing views on the extent of inequality, varying stances are taken on distributive justice. And the result is that resources are allocated differently. Conservative ideologies might engage in a light form of distributive justice that focuses more on charity as opposed to taxes. Libertarians might push this position to its most impractical limit. The underlying rationale for these beliefs is that inequality isn't pervasive, or if it is justified. That last thought will be covered in a bit. As much as I'd like to get into these differing positions, they aren't the focus for now. What matters is the progressive form of distributive justice. You know, what we think about it. Before I get into the specifics, it's worthwhile to do two things. Mention the main body of research that I drew from, and explain why it's so important to start taxes as a first policy. So first things first. I use Taxation Philosophical Perspectives by Martin O'Neill and Shepley Orr. Each chapter has different contributors working in tandem or individually on the various debates and basics in the world of tax formulation. Check it out in the description if you're interested. Okay, enough of the source plugging. I want to hammer down why we're doing all of this in the name of taxes. I briefly went over the importance of focusing on taxes before, but I omitted the juicy details. There's a reason why I decided to start with taxes as my first actual video, and it's because redistribution is a mere fantasy without them. In other words, the most important stance within leftism, economic fairness, is literally rendered impossible without a vehicle for it, i.e., taxes. In the ideal progressive society, taxes are intelligently levied on employers or market/regulatory manipulators in response to their role in perpetuating inequality. These funds are then redistributed in the forms of benefits or placed into public utilities. Intelligent governance is a whole other topic, though. We'll take it on in much greater detail in another video. Now, where was I? Oh yeah, our position on distributive justice. If inequality is high, progressives believe that distributive justice isn't being maintained as an ideal, and that taxes are the mechanism to reorient it. And leftism as a whole believes that inequality is high. Now, as a concept, inequality has been debated and picked apart by many different political theories, but I find that liberal egalitarianism possesses the most nuanced examination of what it is. Therefore, we should examine it before we continue. I totally bet half of you are imagining a bald eagle with a purple wolf cut right now. It's a simple belief, though, that all human beings are equal in worth and status. Although a lot of the people who claim to be egalitarians are walking elves who contradict themselves. Liberal egalitarianism is a specific flavor of egalitarianism that focuses on moral duties owed to citizens, as well as the importance of individual rights. By providing these duties and protecting these rights, society will function closely in accordance with their specific understanding of egalitarianism. One of these moral duties, arguably the most important within LE, is its commitment to reduce the severity and prevalence of these inequitable outcomes. If there are alarming levels of inequality in society, LEs believe that society ought to decrease them, partially through redistribution via the tax system, which is actually where our tax position comes in. Now, it's worthwhile to make a quick segue to explain the whole business of inequality, because it's not just a first principle, it is the first principle, especially for lefties. Really, the whole economic side of leftism is built to crack down on and prevent unfair inequality. So you kind of got to know this. Inequalities can be broadly split into two rad categories: fair inequalities and unfair inequalities. Fair inequalities are economic outcomes that yield a lower share of resources or incentives due to legitimate factors. Let's say you were late and missed a big, juicy, fat birthday cake in the break room because you were out at a Young Gravy concert last night. Not only are your interests bottom tier, but you're not going to get away with claiming that this inequitable outcome is unfair. In this particular outcome, you have certainly gotten the short end of the stick, but because of factors that you're completely responsible for. A more academically acceptable example would be if you weren't paid as well as your colleagues, due to a lack of experience, relevant skills, or overall merit. All the nitty-gritty details aside, what you're experiencing is an inequality in the strictest sense, yes. But it isn't unfair, because the reasoning behind it was based upon these responsibility factors, where you could have worked for the experience, gained the relevant skills, or altered your work ethic. Unfair inequality, on the other hand, is a different beast. As I said before, liberal egalitarians and leftists by extension make an effort to lower the occurrence of these outcomes. Unlike fair inequality, these outcomes are mostly the result of non-responsibility factors, which are outside of the control of the individuals who incur them. Non-responsibility factors such as bias, disregard, self-interest, and their various combinations are of key importance in the makeup of these unfair inequalities. This is due to the presence of immoral and negligent inclinations within the decision makers of these outcomes. Let's say your asshole boss, Trent, decided to cut himself a Wahlburger slice, and you come to the break room to find that nothing is left for you. Maybe Trent's greedy, maybe he's bigoted against you. Either way, you've been screwed out of something that was meant for you. In the real world, unfair inequalities are mostly found in employment agreements, where employers use the power dynamic found in individual bargaining to sweep up more benefit for themselves. The result is that your fair wage has been garnished illegitimately. Not illegally, though. Instead of making $16 per hour, you're making minimum wage. You can't do much or really anything about it. Unfair inequality can be found in an array of different outcomes, but the outcomes that affect the wallet are the ones that really sting. These are financial outcomes, which include expenses, opportunities, income, etc. So, let's wrap up the fundamental position. Liberal egalitarians are against unfair inequality and take steps to reduce it by extending the role of distributive justice in society using the tax system. But we can't argue for a tax system that partially redistributes based on hearsay alone. We need evidence of not just the existence of unfairness, but its prevalence. For that, we turn to a study that measures inequality based on earnings, which attempts to measure unfair inequality on a large scale within the US. Unlike many inequitable outcomes, these can be quantified and used as evidence to determine the estimated levels of unfair inequality, and hence be used as a foundation for our tax system. This 2018 study from the IZA Institute of Labor Economics by Paul Huth, Ravi Kanbar, and Andrea Petschel, titled Measuring Unfair Inequality, Reconciling Equality of Opportunity and Freedom from Poverty, attempts to shed some insight into the rates of unfair inequality. The researchers constructed their own unique norm vector that aimed to reconcile freedom from poverty and equal opportunity, and incorporate it within the vector. They drew from two data sets, 31 countries within Europe in 2010, using the EU statistics on income and living conditions, and a panel study of income dynamics to illustrate the development of unfair inequality in the US over the time period 1969 through 2012. The panel study examined the income of over 18,000 individuals in the United States. Finally, the researchers estimated circumstances and identity types to gauge how they would interact and alter inequality. You can see in Figure 2 that unfair inequality started at 16.6% in 1969, and nearly doubled to 32.6% in 2012. That means they estimated that unfair inequality represented 33% of the total collection of inequitable outcomes, while fair inequality represented 66%. Here's an excerpt from the study to drive home the point.
52% of the increase in inequality can be accounted for by increases in unfairness. Unfair inequality in the US exceeds the corresponding levels of the most unjust European societies, such as Italy and Lithuania, by far in the last periods of observation.
That's quite the quote right there, and one that resoundingly points to pervasive unfair inequality. Here's another short excerpt from a study conducted by the RAND Corporation to really drive home the point. So just to sum up the study in two broad points, they found that the bottom 90% of adults would have had an additional $2.5 trillion in total income in 2018, had their income growth kept pace from 1975 to 2018. And those with incomes below the 90th percentile actually lost a sizable share of their economic power over the last 4 decades. So all in all, I think that this illustrates the need for some form of redistribution. But keep in mind that more evidence is needed to unequivocally prove the scale of unfair inequality in the US. Look forward to shorts in the future that expand upon this body, starting with that RAND study that I just mentioned. What we have now is promising though, and it shouldn't be understated. It lends credibility to the argument that a mechanism is needed to remedy unfair inequality. This mechanism is taxes. By tweaking the tax system to redistribute, progressives alter the norms of distribution in a way that realizes our own position on the ideal of distributive justice. These norms are something we need to consider in the next video of this tax series because our tax system should be checked by them. As you can guess, this video is the prologue of what will be a vast body of work, but by covering the fundamental position that underpins it, we've assured that the roots of our eventual tax position are solid. I want you all to take this opportunity to think about this fundamental argument and why it and taxes, by extension, are important. After I wrap this up, you can find a comment with some questions on it that pertain to the topics covered in this video. I hope you all can give it some thought. Feel free to like and subscribe if you find this content interesting or valuable. Thanks everyone. I'll see you in my next video.